Orpheus and Eurydice, a love lost in the underworld long ago, in a world where forests were endless and rivers wound slowly through valleys untouched by time. There lived a man named Orpheus. He was not a warrior, nor a king, nor one of those figures who carved empires out of stone and fire. Instead, he was a quiet soul with a gift, a musician whose lyre could produce melodies so tender, so haunting, that the wind itself seemed to pause and listen. Birds alighted on branches just to hear him play. Streams that gurgled restlessly grew still, their waters holding their breath to catch each note. Even the trees, tall and ancient, bent ever so slightly as though they, too, wished to lean closer to the sound. Orpheus was the son of the muse Calliope, and though he carried a spark of divine inspiration, he lived more as a man than as a god. He knew loneliness, and he knew longing. His gift was not simply to play, but to weave the quiet murmur of his own heart into every song. And as such, when he met Eurydice, a maiden of the meadows whose laughter was as light as drifting pollen, the music within him found a new theme. She was gentle, unassuming, a figure who seemed at home among fields of flowers and soft summer breezes. Her steps were quiet, her smile unhurried, and when Orpheus played for her, she did not marvel as others did, nor did she weep at the beauty of the song. She only listened, with the steady, calm presence of one who needed no spectacle. And in that silence, Orpheus found a kind of peace he had never known before. Their love grew not from sudden flame, but from slow companionship. They wandered meadows together, sometimes speaking, sometimes not, for words were often unnecessary. Orpheus would pluck his lyre and let notes tumble into the evening air, while Eurydice braided wildflowers into a crown or traced her fingers through the tall grass. Seasons turned, and each moment seemed to settle more deeply into Orpheus's heart, until he could not think of himself without thinking also of her. To him, Eurydice was not merely beloved, she was the soft rhythm against which his music rested, the quiet pulse of a life that felt whole. But myths, even those told softly, cannot escape the weight of inevitability. The tale of Orpheus and Eurydice is not remembered because it ended in joy, but because love was tested by loss. And though the ending is sorrowful, we must walk through it slowly, gently, so that its sharp edges are worn down like stones in a stream. One day, as Eurydice wandered among the grasses, perhaps chasing after nymphs, perhaps only searching for wild blossoms, she was bitten by a serpent hidden in the field. The snake's strike was sudden, and its venom worked quickly. Before the meadow had time to hush, before the song of insects had faded, Eurydice lay still, her laughter carried away like pollen in the breeze. The news fell upon Orpheus with a silence heavier than any storm. His lyre, once an instrument of joy, now became the vessel of his grief. He played, and the sound was no longer light or playful. It was a slow, trembling music that wrapped itself around the heart of anyone who heard. Men wept, women bowed their heads, even the stones beneath his feet seemed to ache with him. But grief, for all its weight, did not silence him. Instead, it urged him toward an impossible thought, that music, the one thing that bound him to life, might be the bridge that carried him into the realm where Eurydice had gone. The underworld was not a place for mortals. It was a land of shadows, ruled by Hades and Persephone, where the souls of the dead drifted like mist and the rivers whispered with memory. Yet Orpheus, tender and quiet though he was, resolved to descend. He carried nothing but his lyre, nothing but the strength of his love, and the melodies shaped by it. And so, step by step, he made his way downward, through caverns where the air grew heavy, across paths where light no longer reached, until the veil between life and death grew thin. The guardians of that place did not turn him away. Cerberus, the three-headed hound who snarled at intruders, lowered his massive heads and listened, lulled into gentleness by Orpheus's song. The shades of the dead, restless and murmuring, gathered close to him, drawn by the sound of his grief, turned into harmony. They drifted in silence, no longer wandering but resting, if only for a moment. Even the relentless Furies, whose task was to punish without mercy, paused in their pursuit of justice, their eyes softening as Orpheus played. Finally, he came before Hades and Persephone, the rulers of that shadowed land. Hades, stern and unyielding, sat upon his throne of obsidian, while Persephone, both queen and captive, rested at his side with the patience of one who knew seasons better than anyone. Orpheus did not speak with words, for words often fall short of love. Instead, he let his lyre speak. He played of fields where Eurydice had laughed, of rivers where they had walked together, of evenings when the world seemed to fold itself around them in quiet acceptance. He played of loss, of the hollow silence where her voice had been, and of the desperate hope that love might reach beyond death. Each note was tender, but together they formed something greater, a plea not shouted, but whispered, steady and unrelenting as the heartbeat of time itself. Hades, who was not known for pity, listened. Persephone, who knew well the ache of separation, leaned closer. When the final note faded, the silence it left behind was more powerful than any argument. And so, after a long stillness, Hades spoke. He would grant Orpheus what no mortal had been given. Eurydice could follow him back to the land of the living. But there was one condition, one rule that must not be broken. As they walked upward through the darkness, Orpheus must not look back at her, not even once. He must trust that she followed, step by step, silent and unseen, until both their feet touched the sunlight again. If he turned, if he let doubt overcome faith, she would be lost forever. And so began the long ascent. Orpheus walked, his lyre silent now, his hands trembling not from music but from the weight of love and fear. Behind him, he could not hear her steps, for Eurydice was a shade, and shades made no sound. He could not feel her presence, could not know for certain that she was there. Each step stretched into eternity, and each moment tested the fragile line between trust and despair. The path wound upward, through caverns and shadows, through twists where darkness pressed close. Orpheus's heart ached with longing. He imagined her there, imagined the softness of her smile, the quiet patience with which she always moved. And yet, the silence pressed harder than any sound. Doubt whispered, what if she was not there? What if Hades had deceived him? What if he walked alone, forever upward, carrying only emptiness behind him? At last, he saw the faint glow of sunlight above, the first touch of the living world returning. The air grew lighter, the weight of shadows beginning to lift. He stepped forward, almost free, but the silence behind him became unbearable. At the very edge of hope, Orpheus faltered. He turned. In that instant, he saw her, Eurydice, pale and beautiful, reaching toward him. For one heartbeat, their eyes met. And then, like mist caught in wind, she was pulled back, slipping into shadow, her form dissolving into the silence from which he had sought to rescue her. Orpheus cried out, but it was too late. The path closed, and the gift was lost. Alone once more, he stood beneath the sun, but without the one who had given his music its meaning. He wandered after that, his lyre always in hand, but the melodies he played were quieter now, worn down by sorrow. The world still listened, still wept, still marveled, but Orpheus himself moved as though half a shade, living yet not whole. Some say he met his end among the wild Maenads who tore him apart in frenzy. Others say he simply faded, walking until the earth itself swallowed his song. But in either telling, his music lived on, echoing not just through strings and notes, but through the memory of love so deep it sought to cross the boundary of death itself. And so, Orpheus and Eurydice remind us of the fragility of trust, the weight of longing, and the quiet truth that love, even in loss, shapes the songs of our lives. Theirs is a tale not of triumph, but of tenderness, of a love that reached where none dared reach. And though it failed, it lingered like an echo. When you close your eyes now, imagine the sound of a lyre drifting softly across a meadow, the kind of song that carries sorrow gently, without sharpness, without urgency. Imagine Eurydice's smile, calm and patient, waiting among the wildflowers. And imagine Orpheus, sitting quietly beneath a tree, his fingers moving over strings not to dazzle, not to grieve, but simply to remember. The melody rises and falls, unhurried, like breath. The world hushes around it. And in that hush, love continues, endless as a song that never truly ends. Pygmalion and Galatea, a sculptor's gentle dream long ago. On the sunlit island of Cyprus, where the sea rolled endlessly onto bright shores and the olive trees swayed with an eternal patience, there lived a man named Pygmalion. He was a sculptor, not a warrior, not a sailor, not one who sought power or kingdoms. His days were quiet and filled with the rhythm of chisels against stone, the soft dust of marbles settling like pale snow around his feet, and the unhurried passage of time that comes when one is absorbed in craft. Pygmalion was unlike many of the men around him. Where others filled their lives with company, laughter, and revelry, he preferred silence. The world of noise and clamor unsettled him, but the stillness of his workshop, the cool weight of stone beneath his hands, and the steady movement of shaping something beautiful, these were his companions. He looked at the world with an eye always searching for form, always observing the curve of a branch, the tilt of a face, the way shadows softened edges. For him, everything was a potential sculpture waiting patiently to be revealed. Yet for all his skill, Pygmalion lived alone. He did not take a wife, nor did he seek out fleeting romances. Some whispered that he found women too fickle, others said he feared disappointment, and still others believed he was simply too consumed by his art to leave space for love. Whatever the reason, he turned more and more to his work, pouring into marble what others poured into companionship. One day, as the sun traced its steady arc above Cyprus and the sea winds carried a gentle salt into the air, Pygmalion began a sculpture unlike any other. He chose the purest ivory white marble, smooth and flawless, a stone that seemed already alive beneath the surface. With patient hands, he chipped away, hour after hour, day after day, until a figure emerged, a woman, serene and graceful, her posture gentle, her face touched by quiet perfection. She seemed not merely a statue but a presence, a form of such harmony that the boundaries between art and life blurred. He named her nothing at first, for statues required no names, but soon he found himself lingering before her, not only as an artist admiring his work, but as a man captivated by something beyond his intention. He polished her arms until they gleamed. He arranged her hair in careful waves carved from stone. He traced the faint curve of her lips with a reverence that surprised even him. Though she was cold to the touch, in his heart she grew warm. Though her eyes did not move, he imagined kindness within them. And though her lips did not speak, he heard in silence the gentleness of words that might have been. It was not sudden, nor was it fierce. It was quiet, gradual, like the way ivy grows slowly up the side of a wall, until one day the wall is wrapped in green and no longer bare. Pygmalion realized he was in love with the figure he had carved, a statue who could not smile, who could not return his gaze, yet who seemed to embody everything he longed for. The people of Cyprus noticed his devotion. They saw him bring flowers to his workshop, draping them at the feet of marble. They heard him whisper as he polished her skin, as though speaking to a companion. Some pitied him, thinking loneliness had clouded his mind. Others mocked gently, suggesting he had fallen too deeply into his art. But Pygmalion paid them no attention. To him, the statue was no mere object. She was an ideal, a vision of love untarnished by betrayal or quarrel, steady and pure. As days passed into weeks, his affection only deepened. He laid silken robes upon her shoulders, though she felt no cold. He brought shells from the sea and jewels from the market, setting them before her as offerings. At night, when the moon shone faintly through his window, he sometimes dreamed of her moving, of her stepping down from her pedestal, her marble flesh warming into life, her lips curving into a smile meant only for him. And though he woke each time to silence and stillness, he did not despair. Instead, he carried those dreams with him, polishing her more carefully, arranging her with greater tenderness, as though preparing her for the day the dream might slip into reality. The festival of Aphrodite came, as it did each year, a time when the people of Cyprus honored the goddess of love and beauty. They gathered with garlands and incense, with prayers spoken aloud, seeking blessings of union, children, and devotion. Pygmalion, who had little reason in the past to take part, now felt a quiet urgency stir within him. He walked among the crowd, carrying his own humble offerings, but in his heart his prayer was not like the others. When he stood before the altar of Aphrodite, he bowed his head and whispered, not for wealth, nor for status, nor even for companionship in the ordinary sense. Instead, he asked for the gentlest of miracles. He asked, in words careful and trembling, that his statue might be given life, that the woman of marble whom he adored might open her eyes and walk beside him. His prayer was not loud, but the goddess heard. Aphrodite, who delights in love of all kinds, looked kindly upon him. Perhaps she smiled at the purity of his devotion, or perhaps she was moved by the constancy of a man who found love in stillness rather than in fleeting desire. Whatever her reason, she resolved to grant him what he asked. That evening, when Pygmalion returned to his workshop, he found his statue waiting as always. The shadows stretched long across the floor. The sea winds brushed faintly through the open windows, and the marble figure stood in silence. He reached out, as he had done countless times, brushing his hand along her arm. But this time, the stone did not feel cold. It yielded faintly beneath his touch, like the softness of skin warmed by the sun. Startled, he drew back, only to step closer again, his heart trembling with disbelief. Slowly, carefully, he touched her once more. The ivory sheen of marble faded, replaced with the glow of living flesh. The stillness in her eyes flickered, softened, and at last she blinked. Her lips, long frozen, parted with the smallest breath. She was alive. Pygmalion fell to his knees, overcome not by triumph but by awe. The woman he had carved, the dream he had carried, now stood before him, warm, breathing, gazing back with the kindness he had imagined so many nights. He whispered to her, words unsteady, and though she did not speak much at first, newly awakened to the world, newly born into its quiet wonder, she smiled, and that smile was more than enough. They called her Galatea, though whether Pygmalion gave her the name or whether it came from the people, no one can say. She learned to walk, to speak, to share in the world that until then had been closed to her. And Pygmalion, once solitary, found his days filled with a companionship he had long denied himself. Together they walked the shores of Cyprus, watching the sea move endlessly, and together they sat in the workshop where once he had been alone. Their love was quiet, steady, untroubled by storms. For though the myth is sometimes told with embellishments, at its heart it is simple. A man loved an ideal, and through devotion, the ideal was made real. Aphrodite, pleased with their happiness, blessed their union. In time, Galatea became not only a beloved wife, but also a presence in the island's stories, a reminder that sometimes love is patient, sometimes it is steady, and sometimes it is rewarded not with passion's fire, but with the calm warmth of companionship. Pygmalion's chisels grew quiet, for the statue he had once sought to perfect was no longer stone but living presence. He still shaped marble, still carved, but no piece ever held his heart as that first one had. For Galatea was no longer a figure to be admired, but a partner to walk beside, and the art he had once poured into stone, he now poured into life with her. And so the tale of Pygmalion and Galatea drifts softly through time, not a story of war or tragedy, not one of betrayal or punishment, but one of devotion, so constant that even a goddess smiled. It is a story of patience, of a love that grew slowly, like ivy climbing the wall, until at last it bloomed in full. When you close your eyes tonight, you may imagine the sculptor's workshop, filled with the hush of marble dust and the faint scent of sea air drifting in. You may picture Pygmalion's careful hands, shaping each curve with reverence. And then, imagine the moment when stone softened into skin, when silence gave way to breath, when love moved gently from dream into life. The world outside may be restless, but in that workshop, there is only quiet, only devotion, only the calm unfolding of a love that, once begun, endured. Hero and Leander, love across the sea. There was once a narrow stretch of sea, the Hellespont, known today as the Dardanelles, where waters moved steadily between two shores, carrying ships, currents, and whispers of stories from one land to another. Along its edge stood a tower, tall and solitary, rising above the waves. Within this tower lived a maiden named Hero. Hero was a priestess of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and her days were steeped in ritual, quiet devotion, and the calm discipline of one who lived half in the world of mortals and half in service to the divine. She was gentle and graceful, moving with the unhurried stillness of one who belonged to the sea breeze and the temple flame. Her beauty was spoken of quietly, not with the fervor of rumor, but with the reverence of something almost untouchable. Men admired her, but few dared to approach, for she was dedicated to the goddess, bound to a life of purity and service. Across the waters, in the city of Abydos, there lived a youth named Leander. Unlike Hero, he was not bound by vows or temples. He was lively, full of warmth, and known for his charm. Yet beneath his brightness was a longing, a quiet sense that there must be more than laughter and fleeting glances. He yearned for a love that reached deeper, something that endured beyond the passing of days. Their paths crossed one summer during a festival of Aphrodite. Pilgrims and celebrants gathered from near and far, bringing garlands and incense, filling the temple grounds with music, prayer, and light. It was there, in the midst of celebration, that Leander first saw Hero. She was not adorned in finery, for her beauty needed no ornaments. She moved through the festival with calm serenity, her presence soft as moonlight upon water. Leander watched her, not with boldness but with quiet awe, as though he had stumbled upon something too delicate to touch. For her part, Hero noticed him as well. Though her vows were meant to shield her heart, she could not help but see the warmth in his gaze, the sincerity that seemed to shine through the crowd. He was not like the others who had admired her from afar. His attention did not carry pride or expectation. It was simple, almost reverent, as though he looked not at a priestess to be won, but at a soul he wished to know. That evening, as the festival drew quiet, Leander found the courage to speak with her. Their words were soft, unhurried, carried by the calm rhythm of the night air. They spoke not of grand promises or declarations, but of simple things: the sea, the temple, the stars above. Yet in that gentleness, something stirred, a connection as fragile as a candle flame, and yet steady enough to warm them both. When the festival ended, Hero returned to her tower on the opposite shore, and Leander to his city across the water. For many, that might have been the end. But for Leander, the thought of letting the connection fade was unbearable. And for Hero, though bound by vows, the silence of her tower now felt emptier than it had before. It was then that Leander resolved to cross the Hellespont each night to be with her. He was no sailor, no swimmer of renown, yet love makes even the impossible seem possible. With the sea stretching wide and dark between them, Hero promised she would light a lantern each evening, placing it at the top of her tower. Its glow would be his guide, a star fixed upon the earth, drawing him safely through the currents. And so their ritual began. Each night, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the waves grew restless in the dark, Leander entered the waters. Stroke by stroke, he crossed the strait, his eyes fixed on the faint light that flickered in the distance. The sea was cold, the current strong, yet the glow of Hero's lantern called him onward. When at last he reached the shore, breathless but triumphant, Hero would be waiting, her smile gentler than the glow that guided him. In the quiet of the tower, they shared their nights together. They spoke in hushed tones, for the world outside could not know. They spoke of their days apart, of dreams for a future perhaps impossible, of the small joys of simply being near. Sometimes Hero would listen as Leander told stories of his city. Sometimes Leander would listen as Hero recited prayers turned into poetry. They did not need much. Their love was not about grandeur or spectacle, but about presence, the simple, patient joy of being together, no matter the cost. And each dawn, as the first light stretched across the horizon, Leander would slip back into the waters. Guided by memory, he returned to his city, carrying the warmth of the night with him, until evening came again. For a time, their love endured in this rhythm, nights of devotion, mornings of parting, days filled with longing, until once more the lantern was lit. It was a fragile arrangement, bound by secrecy and by the sea's mercy, but to them it was enough. Hero's tower, once silent, now glowed with purpose, and Leander's days, once restless, now found meaning in the journey each night. But the sea, though beautiful, is never entirely kind. It shifts, it changes, it reminds mortals of their smallness. And so, one night, as autumn winds grew stronger and the waves churned more fiercely, Leander entered the waters as always, his gaze fixed on the lantern. The current tugged harder, the wind howled louder, but still he pressed on. For love had become his compass, and without it he could not imagine turning back. Hero, from her tower, lit the flame as always, shielding it from the gusts, whispering prayers to Aphrodite that it might burn steady. She watched the waves, straining to glimpse Leander's figure in the dark. The flame flickered, wavering against the storm. Hero cupped her hands around it, willing it to endure, but the winds were merciless. A sudden gust, fierce and unrelenting, snuffed the lantern out. Darkness fell upon the sea. Leander, in the waters, found himself adrift without the glow to guide him. The waves crashed, the current pulled, and though he fought with all his strength, the night swallowed his path. He swam not with fear but with desperation, his heart calling only for Hero. Yet the sea, vast and unyielding, carried him down into its depths. When dawn broke, Hero stood at her window, her eyes scanning the horizon. She waited, hoping to see him emerge from the surf, weary but smiling as always. But the shore remained empty. The waves rolled endlessly, indifferent, and as the hours passed, the truth settled gently upon her, heavy as stone. Leander would not return. Her grief was quiet, not the grief of wailing or rage, but the deep, unbroken sorrow of one who has lost half of themselves. She looked upon the sea, the same sea that had once connected them, and now felt only its emptiness. The tower that had been a beacon of love now seemed a prison of solitude once more. Some say Hero, unable to endure the silence, cast herself into the waters to join him. Others say she remained in her tower, her flame extinguished, her heart stilled. The stories differ as myths often do, but in every telling, their love is remembered not for its end but for its devotion, the nightly crossings, the steady light, the courage to reach across the impossible distance for even a few hours together. Theirs is not a tale of triumph but of tenderness. It reminds us of the lengths to which love will go, the patience it endures, the risks it embraces, and though the sea claimed them, the image of Hero's lantern burning in the night, guiding her beloved across the waters, remains one of the quietest and most enduring symbols of devotion in myth. When you close your eyes tonight, imagine the sound of gentle waves lapping against the shore, the faint glow of a lantern flickering in the distance, and the steady rhythm of strokes carrying a figure across the dark water. Imagine the quiet joy of reaching the other side, of being welcomed by the one who waited faithfully. Let the story settle not as sorrow, but as a reminder of love's patience, its constancy, its willingness to cross even the widest seas. Persephone and Hades, a marriage of seasons in the earliest days, when the world was young and the gods walked among mortals. There was a maiden who embodied spring itself. Her name was Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her laughter was like the sound of fields awakening after winter. Wherever Persephone walked, flowers stirred from the soil, meadows brightened beneath her steps, and fruit trees bent their branches with sudden blossoms. She lived among the nymphs, surrounded by companions, and sheltered by her mother's love. Demeter adored her, holding her close, guarding her as though the world itself might conspire to take her away. For Demeter, Persephone was not simply a child but a light, a joy that colored all the fields she cared for. The earth's bounty seemed tied to her daughter's smile, and Demeter, who knew the cycles of growth and decay, feared above all the moment when Persephone might no longer remain hers. But beyond the bright meadows of spring, another god watched. Hades, lord of the underworld, ruler of the realm of the dead, dwelled in shadows beneath the earth. Few spoke his name lightly, for his dominion was inevitable. Yet though his kingdom was somber, Hades himself was not cruel. He was steady, stern, solitary, and within that solitude, he longed for companionship. He looked upon Persephone not with the hunger of conquest, but with the yearning of one who had lived too long in silence. Her brightness drew him, as light draws the gaze of one lost in darkness. The story is told in many ways, some harsh, some softened. But tonight, let us tell it gently, as a tale not of violence, but of inevitability, of the meeting of two worlds. One day, Persephone wandered farther than usual from her companions. The sun was warm, the air alive with bees and the scent of blossoms. She bent to pluck a flower. Some say it was a narcissus, glowing strangely bright. In that moment, the earth beneath her feet trembled. A fissure opened, deep and sudden, and from it rose Hades in his chariot, drawn by shadowy steeds. He reached for her, and before the meadow could settle, before her companions could call out, the ground closed again, carrying her down into the underworld. Silence fell upon the field. The flowers she had gathered lay scattered, their petals trembling in the breeze. When Demeter learned her daughter was gone, grief overtook her. She searched the earth endlessly, calling Persephone's name, wandering across fields, mountains, and seas. Wherever she walked, her sorrow spread. Crops withered, leaves browned, the earth grew barren. No seed sprouted beneath her steps. The world, once fed by her care, sank into famine. Mortals cried out, but Demeter would not relent until her child was returned. Meanwhile, beneath the earth, Persephone entered the realm of Hades. At first, it was strange, silent, filled with shadows. The air was still, the rivers black. The souls of the dead drifted softly, whispering like leaves carried by wind. Persephone, child of spring, found herself in a land without seasons. Yet Hades, though stern, treated her with honor. He offered her a throne beside his own, jewels carved from gems hidden in the earth, and garments woven in deep hues. But more than these, he offered his steadiness. He did not speak much, for words were not his way, but his presence was calm, patient, unwavering. Persephone, though she longed for the meadows above, found herself slowly listening to him, learning the quiet rhythm of his world. Still, her heart yearned for her mother, for sunlight, for the fragrance of wildflowers. Hades, who knew longing himself, did not deny it, yet he hoped, in time, she might find a place with him. Above, Demeter's grief had reached the ears of Zeus, king of the gods. The cries of starving mortals rose too loud to ignore. And so, Zeus sent Hermes, the swift messenger, down to the underworld, with a command. Persephone must be allowed to return, for without her, the earth would perish. Hades listened, but he was reluctant. He loved her not with the consuming fire of lust, but with the quiet ache of one who feared returning to solitude. Yet he was not unjust. He agreed that she might go, but before she left, he offered her a simple thing, a fruit, a pomegranate, its seeds glowing like rubies in the dim light. Persephone, moved by his gentleness, took the fruit. She ate a few seeds, not knowing the weight of that act. For to eat food of the underworld was to bind oneself to it. When Hermes led her back, Demeter rushed to embrace her. The earth brightened, fields stirred, seeds awoke. But when Zeus learned of the pomegranate, he pronounced the compromise. Persephone would spend part of the year above with her mother, bringing spring and summer, and part below with Hades reigning as queen of the underworld, bringing autumn and winter. And so the seasons were born not from cruelty, but from the rhythm of love divided. Persephone returned to her meadows, her laughter again filling the air. Flowers bloomed in her steppes, harvests ripened, and Demeter's joy restored the earth. Yet, as months passed, Persephone would think of Hades. She would remember his patience, his steady presence in the silence, his longing that matched her own. And when the time came, she descended willingly, the seeds she had eaten now binding her not as prisoner, but as queen. The world adjusted to her rhythm. When she was above, the earth was alive with abundance. When she was below, the earth rested, fields lying fallow, waiting. Life and death became two halves of one circle, each necessary, each inevitable, each softened by love that spanned both realms. Thus Persephone came to embody not only spring's renewal, but also the balance of cycles. She was no longer only Demeter's child, nor only Hadias's queen. She was both the maiden of blossoms and the sovereign of shadows. Her story was not simply of abduction or of loss, but of transformation, of a love shaped by distance, compromise, and the eternal turning of time. Even now, when winter comes, we may think of Demeter, grieving, missing her daughter, and when spring returns, we may think of Persephone rising, her smile bringing life back to the fields. Yet beneath this cycle, there lingers the quiet truth. She belongs to both worlds. Hades, often misunderstood, is softened in this telling. He did not rage, he did not demand, but instead loved quietly, waiting for her to see him, not as captor but as companion. And Persephone, though young and bright, grew into her role, balancing both halves of existence, her heart large enough to embrace both light and shadow. Their love is not simple, nor is it easy. It is not the fleeting passion of mortals, nor the carefree laughter of young romance. It is weightier, bound to the turning of the earth itself. It is a reminder that love sometimes means parting, sometimes means compromise, sometimes means finding rhythm in what cannot be fully joined. When you close your eyes tonight, imagine the world moving slowly through its seasons. Imagine the bright meadows of spring, where flowers open in delight beneath Persephone's steps. Then imagine the quiet hush of winter, where the fields rest under her absence, waiting for her return. Imagine Hades in his shadowed throne room, steady and patient, and Persephone beside him, no longer a maiden carried away, but a queen who chooses her place. In their story, love is not triumphant in the way of heroes, nor tragic in the way of doomed mortals. It is enduring. It bends, it balances, it finds harmony across distance and time. It is a marriage, not of conquest, but of seasons, eternal as the turning of the year. Psyche and Eros, love that learns to trust. There was once a maiden so beautiful that whispers of her spread across the land. Her name was Psyche, and though she was mortal, her loveliness was said to rival even that of Aphrodite, goddess of love. Villagers spoke her name as though it were a song. Travelers carried her story as though it were a gift. People came not only to admire her, but also to worship her, bringing offerings to her as if she were divine. This troubled Aphrodite, whose temples stood empty as mortals turned their eyes instead to Psyche. The goddess, though radiant, felt the sting of jealousy, for she was not used to sharing reverence. And so, she resolved to humble Psyche. She summoned her son, Eros, whom the Romans would call Cupida, god of love, with golden wings and arrows tipped with longing. She commanded him to make Psyche fall in love with something unworthy, a creature or a beast, so that her beauty would bring her no joy. But fate is a curious thing, and love is not always obedient. When Eros came to look upon Psyche, he found her beauty was more than skin deep. She radiated not only loveliness, but also gentleness, a quiet sincerity that pierced him more deeply than any arrow could. In that instant, Eros himself was wounded not by his bow, but by his own heart. Instead of condemning her, he loved her. Meanwhile, Psyche's life, though surrounded by admiration, was strangely empty. Men praised her beauty, but did not dare to love her. Suitors admired her from afar, but none asked for her hand, believing her too close to the divine to be touched. Her sisters married, her peers found companions, but Psyche remained alone. She longed not for worship, but for companionship, for a love that saw beyond her face. Her parents, worried by her solitude, went to an oracle to ask what fate awaited her. The oracle's words were heavy. Psyche would not wed a mortal man. Instead, she was destined for a husband unlike any other, creature feared even by the gods. She must be taken to a rocky cliff and left there to meet her fate. Though the words chilled them, Psyche accepted them with quiet resignation. She did not resist. Perhaps, she thought, this was the price of beauty that drew more worship than love. And so she was led to the cliff, dressed as a bride, her parents weeping as though for a funeral. There she stood, waiting, the wind cold against her skin. But instead of a monster, something unexpected happened. A gentle breeze lifted her, carrying her away as though she weighed nothing at all. The breath of Zephyrus, the west wind, bore her across valleys and meadows, laying her softly upon the grass of a hidden place. When Psyche opened her eyes, she saw not terror but wonder. Before her stood a palace, gleaming with gold and jewels, its halls wide and filled with light. It was no mortal dwelling, but a gift of divine craftsmanship, a place of beauty unmatched. She wandered within, and a voice gentle, disembodied, welcomed her. Invisible servants attended her, preparing baths, feasts, and music. It seemed she was mistress of the palace, though she had no idea to whom it belonged. That night, her husband came to her. She could not see him, for he visited only in darkness, his form hidden. His voice was soft, his presence warm. He spoke with kindness, touched her with tenderness, and though she could not see his face, her heart was comforted. Night after night he came, and each time she felt not fear but love. Yet doubt lingered, planted by her sisters. They came to visit her, invited by her unseen husband. When they saw the palace, the riches, the wonders that Psyche now enjoyed, envy stirred within them. They whispered that her husband was no god, but a monster. Why else, they asked, would he refuse to let her see his face? Perhaps he planned to devour her once the time was right. At first, Psyche resisted their words, trusting the warmth she felt each night. But doubt, once planted, grows. In the quiet hours, she wondered, who was he, truly? Why would he not let her look upon him? Could love endure if it was bound only to shadows? At last, she resolved to see him. One night, while he slept beside her, she lit an oil lamp and held it above his face. What she saw was no monster but a god, the radiant Eros himself, more beautiful than any dream. His wings were folded against him, his face serene in slumber. Her heart filled with awe and relief. But as she leaned closer, trembling, a drop of hot oil spilled from her lamp. It fell upon his skin, waking him. He opened his eyes and saw her with the lamp, the betrayal of curiosity shining in her hands. Eros rose, wounded not by the oil but by the broken trust. He told her that love cannot live without faith, and with a sorrowful gaze, he spread his wings and left her. The palace dissolved, the invisible servants vanished, and Psyche found herself alone upon the empty cliff. Her grief was heavy, but unlike before, she did not resign herself. She loved him, and she resolved to find him again, no matter the cost. Her journey began not with certainty, but with determination, fragile yet steady. She wandered the earth, searching for her lost love. She sought the temples of the gods, begging for help. At last, she came to the temple of Aphrodite herself, hoping for mercy. But Aphrodite, still jealous of Psyche's beauty and angry at the trouble she had caused, did not welcome her with kindness. Instead, she gave her tasks and possible trials, meant to break her spirit. The first task was to sort a vast heap of seeds, barley, wheat, millet, poppy, beans, all mixed into a mountain of confusion. Psyche sat before the pile, despairing. But as she wept, tiny helpers came, ants, countless and tireless, swarming across the heap. They separated the seeds, grain by grain, until the task was done. The second task was to fetch golden wool from fierce sheep that grazed near a river. Their horns were sharp, their tempers violent. To approach them meant certain death. Psyche trembled, but a gentle reed by the water whispered advice. She need not face the sheep directly, it said. Instead, she should wait until they rested in the shade. Then she could collect the tufts of golden fleece caught upon the branches and thorns. And so she did, completing the task with patience, not force. The third task was to bring water from the black river Styx, whose currents fell from impossible heights. Guarded by serpents and dangers no mortal could endure. Psyche faltered, but this time Zeus's eagle descended, taking her vessel in its talons. It soared to the heights, filled the jar with water, and returned it to her. Each time, when she succeeded, Aphrodite was displeased. She gave Psyche yet another task, more impossible than the last. The final one was the hardest of all. Psyche was told to descend into the underworld itself, to fetch a box of beauty from Persephone, queen of the dead. No mortal could hope to make such a journey and return, yet Psyche did not hesitate. She had lost everything once through doubt. Now, through devotion, she would endure anything. She carried 2 coins for Charon, the ferryman, and 2 barley cakes for Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. She walked the paths of shadow, her heart steady. When she reached Persephone, the queen gave her the box, filled with a mysterious gift of beauty. Psyche began her return, her task complete. But on the way back, temptation overcame her. She thought, perhaps, if I take a little of this beauty for myself, I will be more worthy of Eros. She opened the box, and instead of beauty, a heavy sleep spilled forth. It closed over her eyes, her limbs, her heart. She fell where she stood, motionless. Eros, who had healed from his wound and still loved her, found her there. He brushed the sleep from her with the tip of his arrow, awakening her gently. He lifted her into his arms, carrying her not to shadows but to the heavens. At last, he pleaded with Zeus himself to allow their union. Zeus, moved by the depth of their devotion and weary of Aphrodite's quarrels, agreed. He granted Psyche immortality, making her a goddess so that she might dwell beside Eros forever. Their marriage was celebrated on Olympus, even Aphrodite, in time, relenting. Psyche, whose name means soul, and Eros, whose name means love, were joined, and together they embodied the truth. Love and soul are bound, one incomplete without the other. Their trials were not in vain, for they proved that love endures doubt, endures hardship, endures distance and despair, so long as it learns to trust. And so, Psyche and Eros remind us that love is not only about beauty or desire. It is about faith, patience, and the courage to endure trials. It is about the soul seeking love, and love waiting patiently for the soul. Together, they form not a fleeting story but a lasting truth, carried gently through time. When you close your eyes tonight, imagine Psyche standing before the mountain of seeds, her sorrow softened by the tiny ants that helped her. Imagine the golden fleece glinting in the sunlight, collected quietly from the bushes. Imagine the jar filled with black water, carried safely in eagle's talons. And finally, imagine her walking through the underworld, calm, determined, steady in her devotion. And when she falls into sleep, imagine Eros, radiant and gentle, lifting her again, brushing away the weight from her eyes. Imagine him carrying her to the stars, where love and soul, joined at last, endure forever. Their story ends not with loss, not with tragedy, but with union rare among myths, yet eternal in its lesson. Love must be trusted, the soul must be patient, and together they create a harmony that even gods must honor.